Okay, welcome back everyone. After discussing capacity building this morning, I hope you had a chance to build your own capacity during lunch. Because now we turn to the moment when it was made all too clear why capacities need to be in place. Less than 2 years ago, COVID-19 hit the world, and accurate, timely data suddenly became more important than ever. Yet the pandemic also exposed what had been a concern for many years. The frequency and availability of many statistics just isn't up to speed. That's true as well for reporting on and monitoring the Sustainable Development Goals. As a response, the Data for Now initiative was launched already back in 2019. And for our event here, the Secretariat of the UN World Data Forum has put out a call for videos that showcase innovations on how to improve data freshness, if you want to call it that. More than 100 were received, and I thank everyone who participated. We'll see some of those stories throughout our sessions here. You see, as a news journalist, I'm really eager to learn about timely data, as the last 2 years, for us, they've been a constant game of catch-up. Where does the pandemic spread? How quickly does it spread? Which measures are truly effective and which aren't? These are all vital questions that can only be answered with up-to-date data. Here to discuss this are Mr. Albert von Jaarsveld. He's the director of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, known, for example, for its work for the IPCC assessment reports. Hello. Hello. Then we have joining us virtually from Santa Cruz, California, is Rebecca Moore, the director of Google Earth Outreach. Good early morning there. It's around 4 a.m. So Rebecca really got up early for us. We're thankful for that. Mr. Yusuf Murangwa, he's the Director General of the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda. Good to have you. And last but not least, Daniel Azarekie, he's CEO of ESOCO in Ghana. For questions and comments, if you're participating online, I encourage you to use our virtual platform throughout this session. We'd like to hear from you, because the World Data Forum is an event where you can take part from everywhere in the world, so don't be shy. Here's how it works. You use the chat function in the session page, and you type in 1, the country where you're joining us from, and 2, the sector that you represent. For example, an NSO, private sector, international organization, NGO, and so on. You're, of course, welcome there to chat amongst each other through our virtual platform. That is very welcome. Now, before we hear from our speakers, I'd like to first show one of those stories about data freshness that I've mentioned before. It deals with the problem that's affected all of our lives in recent months, the pandemic, of course, and it is from a place that is particularly vulnerable, one of the most densely populated refugee camps in the world.
The spread of COVID-19 has presented many challenges to healthcare systems worldwide. In settlements for refugees and internally displaced persons, which often suffer from overcrowding, insufficient sanitation, and particularly rapid disease spread, the pandemic presents a significant threat, as will any future health crises. In a concerted effort, health professionals, data scientists, and researchers across the UN and academia joined forces to apply epidemic modeling in the fight against COVID-19. Together, they created an agent-based model to simulate the spread of the virus in the Cox's Bazar settlement in Bangladesh for a variety of different scenarios. Imagine creating a virtual world that mimics the way people move and what they do throughout the day to understand how a virus can spread. The team designed a 3-step process. First, create a digital twin of the settlement, including the locations where people might interact, like gathering spots, water pumps, and food distribution centers. Second, simulate the movement of individuals, their daily routine, and how they interact. Third, model the effects of different public health interventions against COVID-19. For example, how effective is mask wearing in particular locations in the Cox's Bazar settlement? In nearly every scenario modeled, Wearing a mask reduced the spread of the disease, and the results allowed policymakers to understand the trade-offs between investing in more effective masks and encouraging more people to wear masks. Combining innovation, technology, and multidisciplinary expertise, we can better determine the most effective public health interventions and mitigation measures against this pandemic, as well as the best ways to respond to future health and humanitarian emergencies.
It's fascinating to see, right, what's possible if you apply both modern technology and human ingenuity. After this very concrete example, we take a look at the big picture with Albert van Jaarsveld. He's a biologist by training. Albert is now taking the bird's eye view, so to speak, providing policy-oriented research into global problems such as climate change, population, aging, and sustainable development as the director of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. Albert, what's your take on projects like the one we've just seen in Bangladesh?
I think it's really important to start applying technology in a way that becomes more useful and more impactful for societies immediately, rather than maybe remotely or at a distance. And I think the methods such as agent-based models, the bottom-up modeling exercises, adds a new dimension to truly understanding the way societies and communities function. And I think that's something that we've been playing with at IASA and a lot of other institutions are using now. And I think it's going to be the future of much of policy-driven decision-making in this landscape.
And I think you have a thing or two to say about citizen science as well, right?
Thank you. I think, first of all, we at IASA have been pushing the notion together with many colleagues and partners around the world of using citizen science to enhance our capabilities in terms of understanding the statistical landscape. Citizen science for us is the public participation in scientific research and knowledge production, and where citizen scientists would share observations around biodiversity, plastics, other pollutants, litter, data from rivers, air, and that reflect on water and air quality, etc. So for us, citizen science includes a diverse suite of projects. It could be strongly scientifically driven with the hypothesis behind it, with scientists driving the work, and the citizen scientists acting as volunteers to accumulate the necessary data. All the way through to projects that are actually co-designed and co-implemented between citizen scientists together with formal scientists. But the most common way of participation in these exercises remain the citizens participate in the data collection process at the end of the day. Now, citizen science can supplement official statistics for policy decision making. We think this is of a huge educational value for the people that are involved and participate in these exercises. I think it also adds towards building trust in terms of the decisions that get made at the end of the day. And it also contributes to what we call the democratization of science. In other words, the people understand science, they start to trust science, and they start to believe in the consequences of what science is telling them. So our research at IASA has shown that some 33% of the SDGs as they stand at the moment, or the indicators for SDGs, could be supported through citizen science data. So there's a huge opportunity. 33% of them. So where people can certainly contribute. And this spans some of the well-known SDG spaces like SDG 15, SDG 14, SDG 6, but it's not only the environmental spaces where citizen scientists can make a significant contribution, it's also in the areas of socioeconomic SDG indicators where they can feedback information around sexual and physical violence or safety issues in the community. They can feedback issues around food and food waste, such as SDG 12, and can also contribute to populations living in slums and reflect that under SDG 11. So there are a lot of these feedback mechanisms that are really useful for enhancing the data that's collected by formal processes. We've been working as IASA in collaboration with our colleagues at the Ghana Statistical Service, together with the Environmental Protection Agency and UNEP, on monitoring marine litter for the SDG indicator in particular, more recent exercise. So from our side, the main recommendation that we'd like to share with the UN the agencies, governments, and statistics communities, is that there's a real opportunity to harness the power of global citizen science to really enhance the data that's available for us to make efficient and effective decisions, and to make sure that the citizens and the communities are part of these decisions, and that they actually accept the decisions as the best way forward for their particular community. So
We have a bottom-up approach.
bottom-up approach is really important, and buy-in at the end of the day. So if people really want to find out a little bit more about citizen science, some of the examples where we're already contributing to some of the SDGs, please, there's a session on Wednesday, 6th of October at 10 a.m., organized by IASA ourselves, the WHO, UNEP, and the CBD. If you want to learn more, please join us for that particular session. So thank you very much for the time.
Yeah. Mark your calendars for Wednesday, 6th of October, 10 a.m. Yeah, you did well. So there's a lot of untapped potential there, and we'll talk about that later. But first I want to take a look at our second video. This one again deals with the pandemic, but in a different way. It's all about customized maps in Nigeria.
The micro-planning is very, very essential in terms of planning or designing a strategy through which the health workers will reach the different target population for that particular vaccines. The Grade 3 program developed 774 GIS-based maps to support the COVID-19 vaccinations in Nigeria. We have 774 local governments, and each local government has one big GIS maps in an A0 size paper. And then the health workers use those maps to conduct their micro-planning.
GIS maps was a very high welcome innovation. We found this method very valuable when it was being introduced by NPSCDS.
Because of this mapping, we will know how we can strategically place the vaccination post so that we can maximize the utilization of our services, especially COVID vaccination.
When I checked the map, I saw almost all the facility in the LGA, including General Hospital, and see all the ward in the LGA, including special places, identification of new structures in the map.
Now I'm really interested what our next speaker thinks about this project, because if you think maps, if you're like me, you think Google. And satellite maps, that has become almost synonymous with Google Earth. But there's much more than that. Google Earth has become a key monitoring tool for scientists and NGOs everywhere, improving transparency in areas like air quality or industrial fishing, through its Google Earth outreach program, that is. That's why we're excited to hear from the driving force behind this project, Rebecca Moore. Rebecca, good morning.
Morning.
What do you think about the project?
Where you are.
Please, share your thoughts about the project.
Yes, I think it's great to see that type of, we call it a spatial decision support tool, really. That type of system for bringing in relevant geospatial and map data that can inform that type of micro-planning decision so that it is more accurate, more timely, more effective. It's great to see. It's great to see that project.
And how does Google Earth outreach work in projects? What do you do to enhance in situations like this?
Yeah, so, you know, just stepping back in this whole theme of data for now, of course, I'm biased because I've been working in the mapping space now for 15 years at Google, but I really do see incredible innovation happening at this intersection of mapping technology, including Earth observation data. And I'm glad to see there's going to be a big session on that, I believe, tomorrow, because there's so much advancement going on in Earth observation with new satellites, new sensors, covering more of the planet more frequently, more accurately, in greater detail. So there's such a volume of data that's coming in now. And I think the intersection of that with cloud computing, large scale parallel computing, and AI to extract information from those raw pixels and turn them into something actionable in a timely fashion. We're really at an amazing inflection point, I think, in the field. So, there's massive amounts of data out there, and many organizations have told us they're actually drowning in data. It isn't that there's not enough data, it's that what they need are insights, what they need are answers. And that's what I think the promise of this kind of technology is. And so for my organization at Google, we call ourselves Geo for Good, in a way. That's our loving name for ourselves. But for more than a decade, we've been focused on developing tools, technology, data, and very much focused on partnerships to address global environmental and humanitarian issues with locally actionable and timely data. And the goal is to drive real-world outcomes, such as reducing deforestation, improving access to clean air and clean water, accelerating adoption of rooftop solar by, for example, taking Google's 3D data of cityscapes that we use to present a photorealistic view of New York or Paris or Bern or Rio de Janeiro, in Google Earth and Google Maps, taking that same data and deriving the rooftop solar energy potential of hundreds of millions of buildings around the world and putting that in the hands of governments and so on, so that they have a basis for making setting more ambitious targets for things like rooftop solar. And we've seen that happen now with a number of cities through our Environmental Insights Explorer by putting that type of data in the hands of these cities. We also did a project to help the world understand the impact of COVID-19 on global mobility through the COVID-19 community mobility reports. You can find that. Stepping back, I think it's maybe instructive to look at how this all started for us. The platform behind a lot of this is Google Earth Engine. It was born in 2009 when we were at a meeting of the Coalition of Rainforest Nations. They were working to meet with scientists and government officials to explore the potential to implement REDD, the Reducing Emission from Deforestation and Degradation. The Landsat data catalog had just been made free. Millions of satellite images of the Earth from space had just been made available for the first time, going back to the 1970s. But it was petabytes of data. And these nations were saying, how are we supposed to manage this type of data? Our computers are 12 years old. And that's where the idea was born for me, that if we could bring all this data online, put it together with massive amounts of computing, and make it easy for scientists to develop algorithms on this data at scale, we could transform the ability to do Earth monitoring and map and measure and monitor a changing planet. So that's what we did with Google Earth Engine. We launched it at the Cancun Climate Conference. Now we've got more than 50,000 scientists all over the world using it, governments using it. There's been a great partnership with UN Environment And we worked with UN Environment and the European Commission Joint Research Center to develop a detailed indicator for SDG 661, the first tier 1 indicator showing trends in freshwater availability, number of other outcomes there. And we're focusing now on not just innovation, but also interoperability. So in the partnership with the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, they are very interested in working with open data cubes. And so we have developed an integration between Google Earth Engine and open data cubes. And they are using Earth Engine to generate near real-time data cubes and put those in the hands of countries. One last thing, just sort of switching to a different topic at the risk of, I'm not sure how my time is going, but given the priority of the UN to leave no one behind, there's also an opportunity for innovation there. As we know, many people don't have birth certificates in the developing world. And we've seen over the last decade and a half that having a physical address is a key enabler of social and economic inclusion. And yet about 2 billion people today don't have an address. So it makes it difficult for them to do things that people often take for granted, like receiving deliveries, voting, opening a bank account, or even applying for a job. So we've created, in 2015, we created something called Plus Codes, which is a free and open source digital addressing system that can bring internationally usable addresses to any place in the world. It's based on lat long, but it's a much simpler system. And we now have a partnership with the Gambia and in Kenya that are using a tool that we developed that now allows them to create plus code addresses for their citizens at subnational and even national scale. And super excited about this in terms of maybe helping to uplift these communities, promoting, inclusion and equity. So if anyone is interested in learning more about that particular project called Plus Codes and this tool called Address Maker, feel free to reach out. So maybe I'll pause there. I think I've probably overstayed my welcome.
Oh, not at all, not at all. But I'm sure you addressed the right crowd here, because there will be quite a few people interested in initiatives like that, and you've shown us how there's a myriad applications, really. But some of you here might think, okay, well, harnessing the data revolution is one thing if you're based in Silicon Valley or in California. That's second nature to anyone. But our next video example actually shows you that innovation happens everywhere around the globe. It is from Indonesia.
City Planning Labs, geopowering cities for COVID-19 response and recovery. A crisis puts a huge amount of pressure on a government's ability to respond with targeted support when information on what is happening in communities is limited. Real-time, practical, and reliable data is crucial at such times. City Planning Lab's unique municipal spatial data infrastructure approach can help provide such data. Working in Indonesia, CPL has helped 3 cities establish strong data foundations so they are ready to deploy critical resources efficiently and effectively, based on real-time data from communities. In collaboration with the World Bank's Global Urban Team and the German Aerospace Center, CPL developed a platform to share and visualize COVID-19 contagion risk hotspot maps for more than 40 cities around the globe. CPL also worked with local governments in Indonesia to create vulnerability maps and target government response more efficiently. The city of Semarang piloted the innovative Call-Up data platform as a response to COVID-19 with rapid digital community monitoring. This platform, dubbed Siap Tanggap, which means ready to respond in Indonesian, gathers direct insights from community needs and opportunities, geo-analyzes them, and allows prioritization. Within days, 46,000 neighborhoods were connected to the mayor's office. With the statistics in hand, the local government could promptly prioritize available resources, match requirements with national budgets, and strengthen access to essential public services. We will continue developing and sharing experiences and practical tools to make city management more evidence-driven and powerful. CPL, Stronger Data Foundations for Sustainable and Livable Cities.
That's a good example too, how important cooperations of various actors is in order to get things running like this in an ever-changing information landscape. Our next speaker has been at the forefront of this for over a decade now, pushing capacity building in statistics and evidence-based policymaking in the country of Rwanda. Now he's here with us. Please welcome the Director General of the National Institute of Statistics, Mr. Yusuf Murangwa.
Thank you very much, Arthur. I see a lot of potential
in things like this.
10 years ago, 15 years ago, we didn't have this. Maybe we didn't have access to this. Now we see a lot of new data. We are seeing a lot of big data and methods that can allow us to do so many things. So there's a lot of potential in this. There is a lot of possibilities in solving some of the challenges that statistics offices have been facing. For example, delays. I had a friend who told me that our statistics reports are like history books. So
that's harsh.
Something happens and we release a report after 1 year. Imagine if we would have statistics for COVID-19 after a year, what would have happened? So it's not acceptable, and I think going forward, these are some of the things that we need to address. It also creates possibilities of connecting. Having real-time data for a real problem gives us an opportunity and the possibility to connect with the issue and the people concerned and resolving the issues. And it also creates a lot of opportunities for partnerships and collaboration. I think that's my take on this.
Yeah. And these are important also when it comes to the economic indicators of the SDGs. I mean, the decent work, economic growth, for example, responsible production and consumption. And you realize within all of those, the agricultural sector actually plays a central role as well. Same goes for climate action, of course. That's why data from farmers for farmers is really important, especially in the global south. Somebody who knows more about this than just about anyone is Mr. Daniel Azrekié. He's a geoinformation scientist, agronomist, and a farmer currently serving as CEO of ESOCO. Do I pronounce that correctly? ESOCO, yes. Which translates to e-market, by the way, a profiling and messaging service for agricultural market data in Ghana and beyond. Welcome.
All right, thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I must say that this is my first international trip after the pandemic began. My last trip was to Morocco, South Africa, and then here I am at this conference. And thanks big to data, and thanks to technologies like what you've seen, why at that time there was nobody who was able to provide rapid data about how the pandemic was spreading. And so every trip or trip that we had to be canceled at that time. So thankfully now we have a lot of tools available that allows us to be able to now actually model even how the pandemic is spreading within communities. I'm looking at all these miles. What comes to mind is I'm really more for connecting the last mile user to data. And so when I talk about last mile, I'm talking about last mile communities, rural people, especially the smallholder farmers across the continent. How do you get all this data to them? So you're looking at agent-based model being used. People are looking at predicting the spread of how the next freeze is going to be. But then the question is, how do you drive this data into the hands of smallholder farmers? And that's what the so-called we have been trying to do. We're trying to bridge access to technologies by rural communities across the continent of Africa. And this is how you do it. You actually connect people using simple mobile devices, SMS, IVR, voice, SMS, call centers, to allow ordinary people to call in and report on issues. I remember when the pandemic began back in Ghana, what you decided to do was there was a total cutoff between extension service delivery for smallholder farmers across the country. And so the question is, at that time, people have been asked to stay home. Nobody was allowed to go to the farms. But how do you even support the farmer to market their crops at that particular point in time? So what we did, working together with other partners, was to set up what we call a telephone-assisted personal interview, where you surveyed a lot of farmers on our platform and asked them, what are their immediate needs? What do you need to do now to be able to survive and cope with the pandemic? And we had a lot of interesting responses coming back from these people. And then based on those responses, we were able to now design a program that allows government and NGOs to provide specific services to these people. And so technologies, especially the one that can be deployed quickly and rapidly, are very, very fundamental when it comes to pandemic situations and emergency situations like this. And so we've been connecting more than 1.2 million farmers across Africa, not only in Ghana, but you have farmers who've been working with us in Kenya, Tanzania, Liberia, Burkina Faso, Malawi, all through a simple data platform that allowed them to access information all over the place. It really is, you're collecting all kinds of data, and if you look at the conversations that are happening here over the last couple of hours, you've been looking at producing data, but the question is, how do you get that data in the hands of the ordinary person? And that's why I think the conversation needs to be driven at. How do you support people to actually understand, interpret the data, and make use of that present data that's being collected across the place?
So you used your platform that was originally built for market data also to communicate during the pandemic.
Exactly. So we had a lot of farmers on our platform. Like I said, 1.2 million farmers. That's a lot. And these people had no access to any kind of information, even on how to take proper care of themselves so they don't contract the virus. And so what you did was to set up a simple messaging platform that you could disseminate to thousands of these farmers within the same time, even educating them how to wear their masks, how large distance they need to maintain between each other, if they have to go to the market, what they have to do. So beyond even the agricultural information, you are now providing farmers with real-time information on COVID-19 prevention protocols. And that for us, for those kind of people, was their only source of information at the time that they could get.
Mm-hmm. And it came from the farmers themselves, what they needed, so that they could communicate their needs.
Exactly.
Okay, so that is almost the citizen science approach you talked about. I have a follow-up on that, though. I can see how that's important to fill in the gaps that official statistical systems have, but it must be hard to integrate these data first into statistical systems and, more importantly, to ensure the quality of the data itself.
Clearly, it's a challenge like all data. The quality issue is always an issue. But I think that there are many responses and mechanisms for ensuring the quality of the data that gets brought on board in these kinds of assessments. I think you can use expert validations, you can use cross-referencing, repetitive samples from citizen scientists to validate data on that basis. You can use training of the volunteers as a basis for doing so. So I think, yes, citizen science suffers the same problems as many other data systems. And we have to make sure that we put the right mechanisms in place to ensure that we have quality that is at least usable and useful for the community to use. But I think there's no perfect data, no perfect data sources. And I think the idea here for us is to ensure that we can validate the data to the point where it can withstand the rigors of scientific scrutiny, to make sure that we can provide data that can be trusted and dealt with. But not all citizen science should be seen in the same basket. I think let's take it case by case. Let's find out how the data was collected, how it was validated, and how we can use it most effectively.
Because sometimes it's hard to monitor. You have a data gap, let's say, in a local lake. You want to have the water quality, and then there's some dude that is measuring the quality. But there's the chemical plant right next to it, so there's a risk of corruption too. So that they might try to get this person to actually report the slightly different data points. How do you address that?
Well, I think the best way to do that is to use triangulation. In other words, to make sure that you have multiple people testing the data and it doesn't come from a single source. So I think so that would be my immediate response. But there are ways of dealing with this. And, I think sometimes a little bit of training of the people that are involved could also help and assist.
Training, and this is also where the international actors and also the private sector comes in,
yes.
who has a lot of knowledge in that regard. Now, Rebecca, there are, of course, great success stories of geospatial information improving the timeliness of data. But we heard also this morning in the discussion here that there's a lot of skepticism in the global south when it comes to big tech companies when data are processed by companies like yours, like Google, not of course, not you yourself, but by Google as the entity as it's seen, do you encounter such skepticism as well?
Of course, and I think we've earned a certain amount of trust, though, and credibility over, as I said, more than a decade of really working sincerely and earnestly to be in service to the scientific community, the NGO community, governments around the world to address these global challenges. And in particular, if you look at something like the Earth Engine platform, what we're doing there is taking public data and making it much more accessible and staged for this high performance analysis. We're not necessarily processing the data into the solution. We're making it easy for the world to do that, if that makes sense. And there have been so many positive outcomes. For example, in terms of sustainable fisheries, I was just thinking Global Fishing Watch is a platform that is powered under the covers by our technology, and it's been adopted by a number of countries that have where their fisheries are quite important, and they're using it for monitoring in near real time the activity that is happening in their exclusive economic zone and ensuring that it is appropriate. And we had an example of the country of Kiribati, which is, an island nation that is broadly distributed, and it's very difficult for them to be monitoring everywhere physically. And there was an incident where one of their marine protected areas was inappropriately fished, and they had an alert in minutes about this, and they were able to do an interception, and it ended up, they collected a multi-million-dollar fine that was more than 2% of the gross domestic product of the country of Kiribati. So that's what, we really want to put this technology in service to, creating more sustainable future. Another example of real-time data, the importance of it is for disaster response. So these, as I mentioned, these satellites are collecting incredible data, including not just imagery, but even the thermal radiation of the planet, the heat that's happening at each pixel. We call them hot pixels. And the GOES satellite from NOAA and NASA updates that every 15 minutes. And that gets into Earth Engine within moments. And it was available to everyone in the world who is using Earth Engine. And we applied it ourselves to create a near real-time detection using Earth Engine and AI of wildfire boundaries. We have a terrible problem, as you know, of increasing number of wildfires that are getting out of control. And they're very dynamic, and people need to know where they are and how they're changing. And we are able to continually update the perimeter of these wildfires and put it on Google Maps. If you do a search, for example, if you did a search for Dixie Fire, it would show up with a map in Google search updated every 15 minutes, powered by Earth Engine, and trying to help keep people safe. So I think this is just the beginning, I think, of timely data for good, I might say.
As the geo for good that you mentioned before, and I think the fisheries is a really good example, because none of us can go out on a boat and monitor that 24/7. So to have that on a platform where it's accessible, it's also for journalists, by the way, that's really important if you report on such issues. And it keeps the data timely. You know that you're actually looking at an almost real-time picture of the phenomena that are observed. Timely data is also the core principle of the Data for Now initiative. Now, Yusuf, I think there's a lot of statisticians in this room that are eager to join the Data for Now. Could you maybe have some tips for them how to do that?
You asked a very good question. how do we get all this data and put it in the mainstream?
Yes.
Because if we are going to use this data to inform development at global level, the SDGs, national development goals, regional development goals, we need to bring all of this in the mainstream. And we have...
You mean the mainstream of statistical
mainstream
data?
To be used.
Yes.
Yeah, to be used. You talked about someone monitoring a lake remotely somewhere, and there's no way that information can be used maybe for policy or validated. So it's very important that, especially if data is going to get into national and global policy, it's very important that it gets into the mainstream. We have two things. One, we have a lot of data, and we are collecting a lot more data. Two, we have initiatives that are already showing potential. Some of them, we just saw them now. We need to do three things to make it work. One of the things that we need to do, we need to start systematically developing methodology that can be validated at a global level. So that we develop methodology gets validated, and we have clear practices of how to apply that methodology. And it doesn't matter who applies that methodology to get indicators and statistics. I think that can be a very good addition to what we are doing. The second thing that we need to do, we've talked about it a lot, is capacity building.
Yes. For
the skills to do this job. There is a very big shortage, especially there is a very big shortage in statistics offices, but I believe these are skills that can be learned. Of course, not 1 month, but we need to start systematically building that capacity. Then if we are to scale up, because we've made a lot of progress, but we are struggling to scale up. We've been talking about this for the last 5, especially for the last 5, 6, 7 years, and I think what we need now is to massively scale up. We need a lot of resources. We need to invest in human resources. We need to invest in institutions that are supposed to be doing this work, both in terms of soft and hard infrastructure. And then we need to build partnership so that we can be up to pace and speed of what we want to do. So those three things are very important.
And the partnerships also involve the private sector. Of course, you laid out your experience as a private sector organizations. Building on that, what do you think should be done in order to have a bigger role for businesses in data innovation, particularly in the Global South?
Right, so I think the private sector needs to be seen as a development partner. Most of the time, when we look at the conversation, the private sector is seen as a kind of people who are only interested in capitalist orientation. They are only interested in making money for themselves.
That's not true?
It is true, but they also play a very important role in society, right? So if you talk about the big corporations like those ones that are out there, that are sort of struggling to meet some data regulations and all of that, there are so many private sector organizations across, especially in low developing countries, that are playing a lot of important role in helping the whole country to develop. And so most of the discussion about data and data collection and data systems normally leave the private sector out in the equation. But they are producing a lot of data also. So especially when I was doing my own PhD research, you are looking for data, you go to the government institution, you ask for data, oh, you don't have it. You go and sit behind your computer, you type it, and then it pops up. What that means is that there's a lot of data that being held with several private organizations, especially NGOs and local NGOs. And these data are not kind of collected or aggregated in a way that people can actually easily access them. And so you only think that whenever you look for any data, the National Statistical Service is the place to go. But most of the time, they don't even have certain kind of data. They are mostly interested in population data and high-level statistical data. But there are things like farmer yields, for instance. You're interested in how much the farmers are making, commodity prices, and all those things. And normally, you can't find this kind of data in government institutions. And the private sector actors are the ones that play a lot of important role in making this data available. And so what I think that the private sector need to be brought to the table. They need to be included in everything when it comes to data collection, especially the data production phase. Data analysis and storage. So you're looking at how do we even have a standard system of storing data, especially certain kind of data that are very, very important for rural people community development programs. How do you have a system where you can go in there and look for specific data that are very, very important in how people can cope, or even coping with certain situations on the ground. And so I think the private sector actors should not be seen as always looking for money for their businesses, but they are playing a very, very important role in creating jobs. I mean, ironically, most governments say the private sector is the engine of growth. Yet, when it comes to certain decisions, they think the private sector is just out there looking for money for their program, for their businesses. But I think that when they are well involved, and they are well involved in decision-making, even what data to be collected, and how the data should be stored, how data should be disseminated, they're going to play a very, very important role in disseminating the data to the community level. I'm very much interested in how to get data to the communities, because most of the time, we are collecting data from them, but you don't have any system in place to make those people actually become direct recipients or users of that data. So you are only interested in going to them and asking them for information, but then when it comes to their own livelihood, how can you use the data to make their own decisions at their community level? Most of the time it's lacking. And this is where I think the private sector can play a very useful role in helping people to have access to very useful data at their community level.
And you proved that your services are very useful, for example, in a pandemic as well. And they were not built for that, but they had the capacity to adapt. And I was just thinking that looking at the SDGs, could the same be true for example, monitoring the environmental impact of farmers in the South? Because that's an important part.
Yeah, so one thing that we also do is that we have what we call digitally enabled agents at the community level. These guys have tablets or they have mobile smart devices that they are able to record anything that happens in their community. So when you're interested in monitoring a particular environmental indicator, all that you need to do is to design that form and push it out to those tablets. And then they are able to collect data and send it to you almost in real time. So when you have to combine technology with people. I mean, they don't go out of each other. So when you have a very good technology, a very good data collection tool, and we have people that have been well trained, they are out there, they live in the community, they are well equipped to collect data for you. Any kinds of data can be collected, whether it's environmental pollution, whether there is water level rise, whether there's flood or drought, anything that you are interested in. These guys are out there, they have a tool that are able to collect the data and send it to you. So you can now analyze that data across several platforms and share it to various stakeholders in the industry.
All right, I think it's a good moment in time now to open up for some of your questions here in the room in Bern, but also for the questions that we have received online. I would like to start in the room, so please, if you have a question or a comment, raise your hand, and either Johanna or Michelle will be close to you. Please state your name, your organization, and who the question would be from. I see a hand raised right here, right next to the camera.
Good afternoon. My name is Alamgir Hossain. I am from Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. My question is to any of one of the panelists that fundamental principles of official statistics 5 somehow acknowledges the different sources of data, but how the innovative data like the artificial intelligence and the other sources of data will be addressed under these principles. So it should be merged with or it should be accommodated in the official statistics, and how it can be done through the fundamental principles of official statistics. Thank you.
Okay, and who was that addressed to, Albert? Or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Okay, could you rephrase it quickly, because we're having some problems with audio
really bad, yeah.
to really just quickly.
Summarize?
To say it again, because Albert didn't understand it.
I couldn't follow the question.
My question was, according to fundamental principles of official statistics, statistical data derived from the statistical surveys and censuses, as well as the administrative data, but it is not clearly mentioned about the data from the different innovative sources like big data, artificial intelligence like this. But how it should be addressed to incorporated those innovative data into the official statistical system.
So to get them into the statistical mainstream, if you will. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's one of the challenges that we face as a community at the moment. Most of that information flows into formal scientific processes in one way or another. And I think the key thing would be to say, how do we bridge the research information and research data and bring that into the mainstream, I think, as my colleague Yusuf has indicated, as part of the statistical formulation process. I think this takes a little bit of trust, but I think it also requires bridge building between the scientific community and the government sector to make sure that they can validate certain data sets they would like to bring on board to supplement the statistics that may be available at a government level.
I actually have something about the statistics on the government level. Did you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I want to contribute to that. There are things that we can already do with big data into the mainstream. I'll give an example, practical example. In around 2015 and 16, 17, we realized an anomaly in the way we compute, for example, GDP. And the reason was because the economy was changing, especially the IT sector. We used to traditionally take data from IT companies, look at the balance sheets, do so much technical work, then get the data. But now we realized that that kind of data was not serving the purpose. And we had to move to data regarding call logs, national calls, international calls, data usage, and so on and so forth. And that is big data. That is data that comes in every minute, every second, every day. And we had to do a lot of research on that. We had to streamline the methodologies. We had to do partnerships with the telecoms. We had to work with the regulators. So a lot of things can already be done. But the most important thing is structuring these things very properly and then integrating them into the system. Thank you.
And also, I mean, what is the priority for which player in the system? And there's a question from Uganda in that regard. It says, the focus should be for national governments to enhance their abilities to produce and use forms of transactional data as alternative data to compare surveys and censuses. This is because the issues that affect the common population are daily occurrences which cannot wait for survey data for solutions. What's your view on that?
We have to move. We have to move from, when a statistics system is starting, we normally start with surveys. Then we move to administrative data, but now we are supposed to be moving to big data. The problem is, for some countries, it's taking us so long to move that trajectory. And in that moving, we have to build a lot of partnerships. Not everything will be done from the statistics offices, because before we used to collect the data ourselves, now some other companies, some other players are already collecting the data. So the business of collecting data is already being done by someone else. The business of structuring data, we're already seeing some other partners that have the capabilities to structure data. So you see, we can also leave that and rely on partnerships with other institutions. Then we can go higher up the value chain of the data and statistics production. So it's something that we need to think through very well and see how we position ourselves in this new ecosystem that we are in.
And it's constantly changing.
It's constantly changing.
Technology is. I saw there's a question here in the room. Please state your name and organization, who the question is from, and so that we can hear you slowly and clearly, because sometimes there's an echo up here on stage.
Okay, my name is Volker Teuber. I'm from the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. I have, if I may, just a little bit kind of provocative question, very short one to all panelists. I mean, we're talking quite a lot about data, data sources, and how important data is. But what about theory? And what about the models that we need to formulate in order to get the most out of the data? Thank you.
Now we're talking models. That's a whole. That's a lot. It could be.
I would say it's connected, of course.
It is connected, absolutely. But it could be an own panel in and of itself. You agree? But you want to take that one?
Yes, I think that depends on the purpose for which you want to use the model for. So, for example, if you're interested in predicting agricultural output, then you may have to design a specific model that allows you to be able to calculate that. So one particular data variable can actually be used for several purposes, depending on what your intention, what your plan is. So if you are really interested in understanding a particular model, first of all, we need to ask ourselves the question, what do I want to get from this data set? Who do I want to use the data, and how do I want to communicate the results to my stakeholders? once these questions are answered, then your model then can be better, proper fine-tuned, and then you can define what the variables should be. Yeah, thank you.
I would also like to get Rebecca's view on that, because building a model is part of making data accessible and usable in the first place. How do you approach that?
No, that's great. Thanks for asking. I think what's maybe the most important thing would be to be as transparent as possible about the model. If it's a scientific model, have a peer-reviewed paper, have the data be open, your methodology be open. If it's an AI model, publish the AI model and let it be independently inspected to gain confidence. I think this goes back to the first question that was asked about how do we deal with non-traditional data becoming part of official statistics. I just wanted to mention there that there is a good precedent that we went through with the SDG 6.6 indicator around freshwater availability. This was an indicator that only 20% of countries had the ability to report. But through this algorithm that was developed by the European Commission Joint Research Center and run at scale using Google Earth Engine, over 6 million images over the last 32 years, we were able to derive the statistical information for that indicator. It was published in Nature. It was open for review, and it went through a UN experts review process before it was accepted as an indicator. So there is some framework for non-traditional data to enter into the UN statistical process. But I think there's a lot more work to be done there.
That's true, and the model is just the beginning, and then you also have to monitor it and make sure that there's an audit, if you will, so that people know what actually is in the calculations themselves. We have a couple of more questions here. Yes, Johanna? You can, yes, I think it's you.
Thank you very much. My name is Urszula Marklewicz. I'm from Poland.
Welcome.
I did research. I very thank you to Mr. from Ghana, director from statistics, for very important state that the statistics needs systematic methodology. It must be also in the area of the IT technology and others. But I would like to inform also that I built a model, science-based model. It is already available, which allows understand what development is and how to realize it through in actual situation at functioning of countries about GDP methods, national accounts and corporate accounts. It was verified. Core model I built 2004. It was verified by 3 global higher education engineering conferences, including also UNESCO. I implemented that in the European Union for information, also very important that all people know what development is. And development is realizing set of human needs, so eating, breathing, drinking, health.
There's a lot of things you incorporated in your model.
Yes.
I'm impressed.
Yes,
but it's just, I understand. I understand.
I finish. And here is an error. One error in the title. So COVID-19 and SDGs. According to the model, COVID is the SDG 3. It is health. Justice health is not another. It is all is very logical. And 4 years ago, I I made the first model was had aligned European strategy, Lisbon in that time, policies from treaties and European research programs, research, education, regional program. And 4 years ago, I extended the model by environment. As closed.
I'm glad to hear that, but just if you have a question, could you phrase it?
No. So I would like to inform that it is ready to use.
That's okay, but maybe then you should be a panelist next time. And what comes to the titles, I just want to say, because I mean, that's addressing the forums themselves.
But like to inform.
I mean, of course, COVID is the starting point, and it was an event that made all too clear why the timeliness of data is important. But as you alluded to, this stretches out to various fields and applications that we need real-time data, and the more up-to-date they are, the better. Do we have more questions in the room? Please, your name and organization, and who the question is directed to. And I ask you to keep it brief if you can. Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Joshua Babatope from Nigeria, Central Bank of Nigeria. Going back to the topic, how to innovate timely data for COVID-19 and the SDG. I know we've expanded it to data in general, but how do we define timely data? Is it daily? Is it quarterly? Is it yearly, as per COVID-19 and SDG data? Now, for instance, in Nigeria, we have daily COVID-19 figures. Now, if you want to say the COVID-19 data should be timely, vis-a-vis what we have in the Western world, where we have online real-time data, how do we achieve online real-time data for collection of COVID-19 data? Maybe probably some of the challenges that we're facing might be because of who is actually collecting such data. I observed that data that is collected by private organizations are actually more timely than the one that is collected by the public sector. So how do we, align this together?
Okay, maybe that's your area of expertise.
Yeah, right, very good question. So when I was talking in my area, I said that during COVID, you did 2 things. One was for us to identify real-time data from people in the rural communities and to understand how they are being impacted by COVID-19. And so we did a rapid survey through using telephone survey and talking to people in the rural community, asking them what really has been the main impact. And then based on those needs assessment, you were now able to design a program together with other partners, with Ministry of Food and Agriculture, with several other partners in Ghana, and then you now was able to offer targeted services to those people. Now, the question is, how do you normally have the private sector and the government sector working together to make sure that information becomes mainstream, like I was talking about? And that, for me, is where the challenge is. Most of this work can be done very, very effectively, very quickly by private sector organizations. But then the question is, how do you effectively collaborate with government institutions to make sure that data becomes mainstream in the public statistical service programming? And so I think using basic ICT tools, mobile devices, having people on the ground who are able to collect data timely, and making that data available on the computer service almost in real time allows you to be able to quickly understand what is really happening on the ground and actually design targeted interventions for those people. Now, it's really up to all of us to make sure there is a lot of very strong collaboration between people with the technologies and the means to do that, and public sector institutions, so that the data can become much more useful to the general population.
But when you want to ensure that timeliness that you talked about, and if it has to be as real-time as possible, and at the same time it has to be verified, and you got to make sure that it's the proper data, doesn't that pose problems?
Yeah, so the good thing, when we're using the technology platform, we are able to control the data quality that comes. For instance, if you're using a mobile device to collect data, you're able to build in a lot of validation controls that allow you to make sure whatever is coming in is actually the right data that has to come in. Okay. Compare that to paper-based forms where you have no control of what kind of data is collected. You are using mobile devices. It's very, very easy for you to now put in a lot of quality measures that ensure that whatever data is coming in is quality, is good, and then if you want to verify that way, you can have some benchmarks to be able to use it. The question is, that kind of benchmark that you want to use, How was it developed? How was it collected? What kind of quality measures were in place for that particular batch that you want to use? But if you can have these things in place, then technologies, especially mobile-based devices, offer a very effective way of getting rapid data for decision-making purposes.
Yes, Yusuf?
Yes, Joshua, that's a very good question. And I would categorize 4 things. It all depends on the phenomena that you're trying to capture. For example, if you're dealing with humanitarian issues, if you're dealing with a pandemic, you want like yesterday's data. Mm-hmm. And statisticians, we've been struggling with that, and we need to catch up. If you are dealing with economic data, maybe you need a month, maybe you need 3 months, maybe you need 1 year. If you are dealing with demographic data, maybe you need 5 years. So it's not like one basket where everything falls in that one basket. These are things that we need, especially as we move forward. We need to sit down, structure these things, make sure that we develop good methodologies that are validated, that cater for all of these things. Thank you very much.
So every measure has its own rhythm, if you want to call it that. Actually, every question has its own rhythm too. I have a very short one. Why is there no funding for citizen science? No funding?
Yeah, everybody keeps asking that question, and I think it's something that we need to get the public funders to buy into, but I must say that...
Yeah, it came from our online audience.
Yeah, no, I'm sure of that, but I can tell you that I think the big science funders are starting to understand the value of citizen science. The European Commission and other funders are participating and supporting these kinds of initiatives. I think it's growing. I think what we're trying to do in the process, of course, also is, besides growing the funding streams, is to make sure that we share best practices across the science community and citizen science community in this regard. And there's the Wednesday conversation will be about a new initiative called the Global Citizen Science Partnership, which is really about sharing best practices around the world as far as this is concerned, to make sure that we learn from one another and can hopefully convince and assist with the assimilation and mainstreaming of the data into our activities.
That Wednesday.
Wednesday is a big
now
day.
Everyone yeah, it's right after the gala evening, so now they have to get up early. Yes, I see a question here, and the gentleman with the mask on.
Thank you. My name is Anil Chaudhary. I run a program called A2I, the government of Bangladesh. It's a whole of government digital transformation program. I have 3 quick questions. I'll be very brief, I promise.
Okay, can you pose them after each other? Because then it's hard to remember.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So to Rebecca, I think the address maker, the plus codes, I think is quite exciting. During COVID, we actually ran a challenge competition for Google Maps Map Maker. And that was actually very, very useful because we generated about 100,000 plus new locations within a matter of weeks by citizens.
Wow.
So something similar, whether we can do with address maker. I didn't know about address maker. And we need to do that because we are working with our postal service to make sure that every address is, for e-commerce, growth of e-commerce, that's very important. So that would be one question. How do we do that?
Okay, that's directed at Rebecca. Just quickly let her come back. The second one we'll get to that. Rebecca.
This is perfect, and the example you gave of e-commerce is the one that we're hearing is actually, it was a little surprising to us, but was the most important thing that people were seeking, would be to have access for deliveries. Is there a way for us to connect through this UN World Data Forum?
I hope.
I'm sure we'll be able to make that possible.
Let's do that, and then I can get you connected.
All right. You see, this is why you're here, to get the connections to people like Rebecca. So your second question, yes?
Question to Yusuf about, I think you talked about private sector, a lot of different types of data. In Bangladesh, we have tried an open government data platform for the last 5-6 years. UNSD has been involved, SCAP, UNDESA have been involved. We've made some progress, but I think where we get stuck is how do we open this up to the private sector? And we've used a lot of private sector data during COVID as an exception. So how do we move forward, perhaps with open data where private sector will contribute? And I have a third question. Should I ask that? Or?
No, keep it, and then Yusuf can answer this one.
Sure.
I think, for example, in Rwanda, the Statistics Act allows us to get any data. But you have to be very responsible because you don't want to use private data and then compromise the interests of the private entity. That is very important. You have to make sure there's confidentiality. So it all depends on regulations and the partnerships that you build with the stakeholders. Yeah.
Is there any best practice that we can follow? I mean, we're struggling with that.
I don't think there's a global best practice. It all depends on the context of every country, but it can be done, yeah.
All right.
And the third is...
Number 3, all good things in life.
Thank you for the opportunity. The number 3 is actually open to the panelists. It's about data for prediction. So we have developed an appetite in Bangladesh for collecting data and using AI for prediction in health and also in social safety nets. We're taking example from Togo, which has done really good work in using telco data for poverty ranking. So essentially using telco data as a proxy for people's ranking of poverty, and as the data dynamically changes, survey is just not a useful tool for that.
Okay, but it's interesting because telco data is not poverty, but can you use it as a proxy? Is that legitimate?
Well, a professor in Berkeley actually developed a methodology using...
I'm sure it's properly done, but proxies are proxies.
Sure.
Yeah, right. That's true. So I think it depends on the context where the data is being collected, what kind of partners you're working with. So for instance, you're working with the UN or the World Bank, they have very specific definition for poverty, for instance. And so those kind of definitions, you cannot use telecom data or telco data as a proxy for that. If you are using a tool like, say, the proxy being test2, for instance, which has defined poverty in a very strict terms, then your best option will be to do a survey to be able to understand, to be able to collect that kind of data, that ground data at the ground level. But of course, if you are interested in financial inclusion programs where you want to understand how many people can actually be included in a financial program, then mobile network data can become very, very useful for that kind of situation.
Right. And then we're using Google's data for flood forecasting. And we've improved flood forecasting in Bangladesh quite a bit. And combined with that, now we're exploring the possibility of preemptive social safety nets. So essentially providing the safety nets before the event actually happens. So we have not done it yet, but research shows, from UK, research shows that that kind of data can actually help in reducing poverty, especially when there is vulnerability and shocks.
Wow, before it actually happens, that used to be the stuff of science fiction, but here we are.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have time for a final question, and it would be great if it would be coming from a lady. Otherwise, I'm being told that I'm biased. Claire said she's biased, but I'm totally not. I'm just looking if there's someone. Ladies, please, they're right in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you. First time raising a hand in a real space in too long.
Yes.
My heart is beating very fast. But yeah, I wanted to communicate around that discussion on timely data and thinking as well about the fact that when we are looking at COVID-19 and the SDGs, we are also talking about things that many problems that were there are kind of structural. We are looking at, for example, the impact of COVID being so hard because of lack of social protection or because of lack of health coverage in many countries. And those things, there is a lot of data out there already, particularly those that are produced in the human rights systems, for the human rights systems, for the monitoring of human rights, which are directly relevant for now learning how to deal and to respond to COVID-19 and also to make progress on the SDGs. So one of the things that I wanted to bring to the panel and also hear your opinions on it is on the use of qualitative data in that sense, the human rights data in itself, in the knowledge that we get from that, both in terms of getting some quantitative perspectives on issues related to the SDGs and COVID-19, but also in the solutions that it points towards when reading and using that kind of data. And also thinking of it in, if it's possible even, to think of it in the timely perspective that we're discussing here when we particularly look at those structural problems out there related to both COVID and SDGs. Thanks.
Role of human rights data?
Yeah, well, human rights data, of course, is always sensitive, and it depends on the context in which it's collected, and you have to be very careful about the privacy issues around the data as well at the end of the day. But I think it can be anonymized to the point where it can be very useful, and it can be used for statistical purposes. But I think it requires some ethical considerations from the research teams involved and from the people collecting the data as to how best do we use this data for the benefit of society. I think that's really what we're after. And if we do it in a responsible manner, then I've not encountered any major obstacles from that point of view yet. But that there could be problems there for sure.
Okay, that concludes our session for now because it's almost 2:30, and you know, speaking of timely, we're in Switzerland, so I will land on the exact same minute I said we will end this session on. But I really think we take a lot away from this when it comes to data innovation and to generate data in time, how to make it as accessible, and to find an own approach for each different kind of situation. I thank our speakers up here for their thoughtful inputs and their answers also in the discussion. It was an honor to have you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.